The Galactic Empire controlled millions of star systems for over 2 decades. But it wasn't just Darth Vader and a bunch of guys in gray uniforms. The Empire ran on a massive web of military branches, intelligence agencies, and political arms that most fans have never fully understood, so today we're breaking down every single branch of the Galactic Empire, starting with the most iconic soldiers in sci-fi history, Imperial Stormtrooper Corps. Everyone loves to joke about stormtroopers having terrible aim, and look, I get it. But here's the thing, these soldiers went through rigorous combat training at Imperial academies across the galaxy. The can't hit anything reputation comes almost entirely from encounters with Force users and plot armor. Against standard Rebel infantry, stormtroopers were devastating. The Corps deployed troops across every theater of Imperial suppression, from Jedha to Scarif to Endor. Each trooper wore white plastoid composite plates over a black body glove, heavy enough to make comfort a distant memory. Iconic? Absolutely. Pleasant to wear? Not even close. And here's something casual fans miss entirely. Stormtroopers aren't all clones. The Empire transitioned from Jango Fett cloning stock to recruited human soldiers years before the original trilogy. Even the 501st Legion, Vader's Fist, eventually filled its ranks with enlisted recruits. The clone era was over, but stormtroopers were just the tip of the spear. The Empire's actual ground army was a completely separate branch. Imperial Army. Here's something that will bother you once you hear it. Every single ground battle in Star Wars has Imperial soldiers in it that aren't stormtroopers, and nobody notices them. The Imperial Army was the Empire's dedicated ground warfare branch, completely separate from stormtroopers. They commanded AT-AT walkers, ATST walkers, entire planetary armor divisions, and they did it all while wearing olive drab fatigues with brass rank pins instead of sleek white plastoid armor. That visual difference wasn't accidental. Stormtroopers were the propaganda face of the Empire. The army was the occupation force. They garrisoned worlds, held territory, and ran suppression operations like the 224th Imperial Armored Division, which was deployed across multiple sectors specifically to crush rebel activity. Unglamorous, thankless, permanent. And when the Battle of Hoth rolled around, it was army armor columns that took devastating losses pushing through rebel defenses on the ground. But nobody remembers that part. They remember the stormtroopers walking through Echo Base afterward. The army did the work. The stormtroopers got the recruitment poster, which is, not ideal, but at least the army had walkers. Some Imperial branches didn't even get a cockpit. Imperial Starfighter Corps. The Empire spent 18 months training each TIE pilot at the Academy on Pref Spelt 4, then strapped them into a fighter with no shields and no hyperdrive. Let that sink in for a second. You cannot retreat in a TIE fighter. You either win or you die, because your ship literally cannot leave the battlefield without a carrier to go back to. And that's not an oversight. That's the design. TIE fighters were built to be mass-produced and thrown away. The pilots inside them were, structurally speaking, just as disposable. Standard pilots wore black flight suits with red stripe rank insignia. Officer helmets got the red accents, and every single one of them knew the deal. You fly until you don't. But here's the thing, some of them were genuinely incredible. The 181st Imperial Fighter Wing under Soontir Fel was considered the most elite starfighter unit in the entire Empire. These pilots could dogfight with the best the Rebellion had to offer. They just happened to be doing it in cheap, shieldless coffins, elite training, disposable machines. If that doesn't sum up the Empire's entire philosophy, nothing does. But the branch that actually deployed those carriers and capital ships, that's a whole different beast. Imperial Navy. If the Stormtrooper Corps is the Empire's boot on your neck, the Navy is the Star Destroyer floating above your city reminding you the boot exists. At its peak, the Imperial Navy fielded thousands of capital ships spread across the entire galaxy. Star Destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels organized into regional fleets, each one answering to a Moff who probably got the job by being the most agreeable person in the room. The sheer scale of it was obscene. The crown jewel was the Executor-class Superstar Destroyer, a 19-kilometer monument to the philosophy of what if we just made it bigger. Officers aboard these ships wore olive gray uniforms with rank plaques on the chest, every square on that little colored badge telling you exactly how much authority someone had to ruin your day. Looking professional while blowing up a planet, standard Tuesday. At the top sat the Grand Admirals, the highest naval rank in the Empire. Thrawn is the most famous, and for good reason. He's the one guy who looked at the Navy's entire doctrine of park, something enormous nearby, and hope everyone surrenders and said, this is going to get us killed. He was right. The Navy was built to intimidate, not adapt, and the rebellion exploited that rigidity every single time. But while the Navy crushed systems with firepower, another branch was quietly strangling them with paperwork: Imperial Customs. Here's the branch that nobody makes fan art of. No cool helmets, no star destroyers, no force powers, just guys in uniform standing at spaceport checkpoints asking if you have anything to declare. And yet, if you actually lived in the Star Wars galaxy, this is the branch you'd interact with more than any other. Imperial Customs handled tariff collection, trade route taxation, and contraband enforcement across millions of inhabited star systems. Their officers wore standard Imperial uniforms with rank insignia, visually indistinguishable from the rest of the bureaucratic machine, but still carrying enforcement weapons. Because paperwork and a blaster go hand in hand, apparently, Customs patrols ran checkpoints at spaceports, orbital stations, and hyperspace exit points. They tracked smuggling operations, including, yes, the Millennium Falcon's various career highlights. But contraband seizure was almost secondary to the real function. Here's where it gets dark. The Empire didn't need to bomb rebel sympathetic worlds into submission. They could just tax legitimate trade into oblivion, blockade medical shipments, revoke merchant licenses, strangle an entire planet's economy without firing a single shot. Andor showed us exactly how this works. Bureaucracy isn't boring when it's the thing starving your family. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy is a clipboard, but if quiet economic strangulation feels unsettling, wait until you see what the Empire was building in its laboratories. Advanced weapons research. Here's the thing about the Empire. They could have built entire fleets with the resources they poured into the Death Star. Entire fleets. Instead, they built one giant ball, watched it explode, and then immediately built another one, which is, not ideal. Advanced weapons research was the division responsible for the Empire's most catastrophic ideas. The Death Star, the Death Star 2, kyber crystal weaponization, planetary shield cracking tech. If it could destroy a planet or ruin your afternoon on a galactic scale, these were the guys behind it, and the numbers are genuinely stupid. The first Death Star was 160 kilometers in diameter. The station needed approximately 1.7 million crew members just to operate. That's not a weapon, that's a small country that floats. But here's where it gets interesting. The Death Star was never really about the rebellion. Palpatine needed it to keep his own people in line. When you've got thousands of officers across the galaxy with their own fleets and ambitions, nothing says don't get creative like a moon-sized laser pointed at whatever planet you happen to be standing on. The researchers themselves wore standard gray officer uniforms with code cylinders indicating their clearance level. Very professional attire for people whose entire job was building things that get blown up by teenagers. But superweapons were only one side of Imperial innovation. The stuff coming out of standard R&D was just as terrifying and way more practical. Imperial research and development. If advanced weapons research was the Empire's flashy science fair project, the broader Imperial war machine was the branch that actually kept the lights on. Every AT-AT walker, every AT-ST scout walker, every TIE interceptor, every probe droid, all of it came out of a sprawling network of military contractors and development labs. And the scale was genuinely absurd. We're talking simultaneous development programs spread across facilities on Kuat, Fondor, and dozens of classified installations. Kuat Drive Yards alone was responsible for the Star Destroyer line, the AT-AT program, and multiple starfighter prototypes all running in parallel. CNR Fleet Systems handled TIE production. Arakid Industries built the probe droids. The Empire didn't just have one R&D department. It had an entire industrial ecosystem of competing contractors all racing to build the next thing that kills better. But here's the number that really puts it in perspective. The Empire deployed thousands of Viper probe droids across the galaxy just to hunt down one rebel base. Thousands of little metal spiders scanning every frozen rock in the outer rim, and one of them found Hoth. One single probe droid landed on the right planet, detected the shield generator, and that was it. The entire Battle of Hoth happened because one automated scout out of thousands got lucky. That's not strategy, that's brute force math. And if you watched Andor, you saw what building all that technology actually cost. Narkina 5 wasn't a prison. It was a parts factory with inmates. But knowing what the Empire built is only half the picture. You also need to know who was watching while they built it. Imperial intelligence. The Empire had spies embedded on practically every inhabited world in the galaxy. rebel worlds, pirate havens, neutral systems, you name it, and they still couldn't find the rebellion. Let me explain. Imperial intelligence was the Empire's primary espionage and signals intelligence service, and unlike every military branch we've talked about so far, it didn't report to the military hierarchy at all. It reported directly to the office of the Emperor. These operatives wore civilian clothes or standard military uniforms depending on the assignment, with zero visual markers identifying them as intelligence assets. You could be standing next to one right now. Well, not right now, but you get it. Here's where it gets interesting, though. The entire service was built on compartmentalization. Every cell operated in complete isolation from every other cell. Agent A had no idea Agent B existed, and neither of them knew what Agent C was doing 3 systems over. In theory, this meant if one operative got captured, the whole network stayed safe. In practice, it meant nobody could actually piece together the full picture of what the rebellion was doing. And Palpatine's solution to this massive strategic blind spot, the Force. He literally replaced coordinated intelligence analysis with space wizardry. Instead of fixing the organizational structure, he just assumed he'd sense threats coming, which is, not ideal when your throne room has a reactor shaft in it. But if Imperial intelligence handled threats abroad, wait until you meet the branch that handled threats at home. ISB, Imperial Security Bureau. Every branch we've covered so far operates on the assumption that the Empire's enemies are external. The ISB operated on the assumption that the enemy was already inside. The Imperial Security Bureau was the Empire's domestic counterintelligence agency, answering directly to the Emperor himself, not the military chain of command, not the Moffs, Palpatine. And that distinction matters because it meant ISB agents carried authority that outranked virtually every officer they encountered. You'd know them by the gray uniforms, black boots, and angular insignia deliberately designed to look nothing like standard military dress. Different branch, different kind of power entirely. Where Imperial intelligence handled foreign espionage, the ISB handled you, your neighbors, your co-workers. The guy at the cantina who said something a little too loud about taxation. ISB coordination with Comnor meant they had access to party infiltration networks specifically built to identify disloyal citizens. They didn't just arrest dissidents. They created an atmosphere where everyone assumed someone was listening, because someone usually was. Field operations on worlds like Ferrix and Aldani deployed teams of 6 to 12 agents per counterinsurgency cell disruption. And if they brought you in, you stayed brought in. ISB maintained detention and interrogation facilities across multiple worlds, including the Narkina 5 installation, where prisoners were worked until they stopped being useful. Interrogation protocols ranged from standard to force-assisted, depending on how important you were. Andor showed us exactly how terrifying a bureaucrat with a mandate can be. But bureaucrats with mandates are nothing compared to fanatics with lightsabers. Imperial Inquisition. Every branch we've covered so far enforces the Empire's will through ships, soldiers, spies, or bureaucracy. The Inquisition enforces it through faith, or more accurately, the destruction of it. Subordinate directly to Darth Vader, the Imperial Inquisition was a division of Force-sensitive hunters tasked with one job: erase the Jedi. Not just kill them, erase them. Their history, their teachings, their artifacts, their children, every trace of the old religion gone. The Grand Inquisitor ran day-to-day operations, overseeing hunters designated by number rather than name. The second sister, the ninth sister, the fifth brother, each one a former Force-sensitive convert, turned into exactly the thing they once would have feared. They wore black robes with crimson accents, carried spinning double-bladed lightsabers that looked like industrial equipment, and answered to nobody except Vader himself. And they were horrifyingly effective. By 10 BBY, the Inquisition had eliminated an estimated 99% of surviving Jedi. 99%. By the time of A New Hope, Imperial intelligence confirmed somewhere between 20 and 30 Jedi remained alive in the entire galaxy, out of thousands. But killing wasn't even the full mandate. Inquisitors recruited Force-sensitive children, identified Force-sensitive assets for Imperial use, and recovered Jedi artifacts to prevent anyone from rebuilding what was lost. This wasn't a military operation. This was cultural annihilation. The Empire didn't just want the Jedi dead. They wanted the galaxy to forget the Jedi ever existed, which is, not ideal. But if the Inquisition controlled what people believed, the next branch controlled what people were even allowed to think. Comp Nor. Every branch we've covered so far controlled what you did. This one controlled what you thought, and nobody talks about it. Comp Nor, the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order, was the Empire's political indoctrination machine. Not a military division, not an intelligence agency, a propaganda ministry with 20 million active members spread across party cells, youth organizations, and mandatory enrollment programs on every imperial-aligned world. Let that number sit for a second. Let 20 million people whose entire job was making sure you loved the Empire, or at least acted like you did. The organization controlled media distribution, educational curriculum, and loyalty verification across imperial systems. Officers wore tan and gray dress uniforms. Younger members wore Youth Corps and Imperial Academy cadet uniforms. It looked clean, professional, almost boring, which was exactly the point. But here's where it gets genuinely sinister. Comp Nor didn't just print posters and write school textbooks. It coordinated directly with the ISB. Every party meeting, every youth gathering, every loyalty seminar was also a surveillance opportunity. Members reported on each other. Neighbors flagged neighbors. Rebellion sympathizers got identified not through interrogation rooms or Star Destroyer blockades, but through casual conversations at community events. And if you got flagged, ideological re-education programs, which is, not ideal. The Stormtrooper Corps could shoot you, the ISB could arrest you, the Inquisitors could hunt you, but Comp Nor made sure you never wanted to resist in the first place. It didn't need weapons because it already had your mind. Every other branch was a hammer. This one was the hand slowly reshaping the nail before the hammer ever needed to swing. But even Comp Nor answered to something older, something that pretended to be democratic while being anything but. The Imperial Senate. Here's the cruelest joke in the entire Galactic Empire. The highest political body in the galaxy, thousands of representatives from thousands of systems sitting in the most important building on Coruscant, wearing formal robes embroidered with their homeworld insignia, and they couldn't pass a single binding law. Not one. The Imperial Senate was a rubber stamp with no ink. Representatives were appointed to advise the Emperor on logistics and sector-specific issues, which sounds important, until you realize advise meant talk, until Palpatine got bored and did whatever he wanted anyway. Zero legislative authority, zero enforcement power, zero ability to override a single Imperial decree. They could recommend things. That was the job. Recommending things to a man who could shoot lightning from his hands. And the theater of it all was genuinely something. Protocol required every senator to stand when Palpatine entered chambers. Thousands of politicians rising to their feet for a dictator who had already decided everything before he walked through the door. It's like clapping for the weather. It was going to happen regardless of how you felt about it. But here's where it stops being funny. The Senate wasn't an oversight failure or a broken institution. It was designed this way. Palpatine kept it alive on purpose, specifically to maintain the illusion that the Republic's democratic tradition still meant something, a costume democracy. Every session, every vote, every debate was set dressing for an autocracy that had been running unchecked since day one. By 0BBY, he didn't even need the set dressing anymore. Palpatine dissolved the Senate entirely, handing all remaining authority to military Moff governors and regional commanders. No vote, no transition period. Just gone. And that's the thing about every branch we just covered. The Stormtroopers, the Navy, the intelligence agencies, the Inquisitors, Comp Nor, all of it. Every single one answered to one man who eventually looked at the last remaining symbol of shared governance in the galaxy and said, I don't need you to pretend anymore. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.